Okay, so this is going over question number 2, or sample question number 2 for the 2020 exam. Question number 2 is like one of the long questions on previous exams. So it's going to be worth 10 points. Now, the question that they've given you, the sample question from 2002, was actually worth 14 points in the year that it was asked, in 2002. They would tweak all of this so that it's going to come out to be 10 points. But let's go through this currently. So they ask you, using a correctly labeled aggregate supply and aggregate demand graph, show the impact of a sudden large decrease in private investment spending on each of the following. Originally, they wanted you to graph it. You're not going to be required to graph this time around. So they would reword the question. If you look in the italics there, what would be the impact of a sudden large decrease in private investment spending on output and price level? This is where they want you to have a piece of scratch paper handy. You will draw the graph on your scratch paper and then put an answer, write out an answer without a graph on your answer there. So on your scratch paper over here, you draw that graph. It's an ADAS graph, price level, GDP, aggregate demand, we'll call it AD1, aggregate supply, we'll call it AS1. Now with this one, they're not asking anything about long run AS, so we don't need to worry about that. If you want to draw it in, be my guest, but what's the impact of a big decrease in private investment spending? Investment's a component of AD, okay? AD is going to shift to the left, AD2, and this informs your answer. There was output 1 and price level 1. Here is output level 2 and price level 2. So for the first part, we have a reduction in price level and a reduction in output. Now here for output, if you put Y, I'm pretty sure that the readers are going to understand that. If you put Q, that would be, actually more teachers teach it that way, I think, high school level teachers anyway. College level teachers usually are using the Y. I'd put the Q or just write out the word output. All right, so we know that output is down, price level is down. Why? Because AD shifted left. It went down. AD declined, okay? All right, part C, use the results in A, explain how employment is affected. Here's where you've got to slow down and read every word. It wants you to explain how employment is affected. Well, employment will decline, will decrease, okay, because AD has shifted to the left. They might have asked you explain how unemployment is affected. Unemployment increases. So be careful, read thoroughly what they're asking. They want you to talk about employment, E-M-P-L, employment declines, okay? And I think they wanted you to explain. And so that explanation is because output decreases. Next part here. Identify one specific fiscal policy that might be implemented to offset the effects of decreasing investment. A fiscal policy. I can't tell you as an AP micro reader how many times students get the wrong thing. They start talking about monetary policy here. So make sure you're doing what is asked. A fiscal policy, and of course, if we have that, it's either increase government spending or decrease taxes, okay? So part C, it's either increase government spending or decrease taxes. You don't have to put both, just put one. Okay, I'd go with the simplest one, increase government spending. Explain how the policy would affect each of the following in the short run. How will it affect aggregate demand? Aggregate demand will increase because government spending is a component of AD. That, you have to write that out, okay? So government AD increases because G is a component. COMPONENT of AD. Output and price level, well, they're both going to increase. Okay, so this is now part E. This was F. This is E. Price is going to go up. Price level is going to go up, and output is going to go up because AD increased, because AD shifts to the right. That's the answer they're looking for there. It may seem that you should write something more complicated, but that's it. That's the answer. And how's that going to impact real interest rates? Okay. Now this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. B, C, D. This was part D. I got my letters wrong. This is part E. This is part F down here. So interest rate is going to increase. Real interest rates are going to increase. Ignore my phone over there because there's the government is getting into the loanable funds market. They're increasing the demand for loanable funds, and increase in the demand for loanable funds increases the interest rate. That's what you write down there. Okay. All right. Identify an open market operation. Now they're going into monetary policy. Identify an open market operation that the central bank might implement to offset the effects of the decrease in investment, and explain how the policy would affect each of the following. Of course, they're going to be buying. This is so part G. Well, right here. Part G is they're going to buy bonds. Okay. If you say buy securities, that'll be just fine. No problem. And how will that affect real interest rates? That will reduce interest rates because it'll increase the money supply. Okay. So, G, buy bonds, and the second part of G is going to be that it's going to interest rate is going to go down because money supply increases. Remember that when they buy the bonds, you don't have to draw this graph, but you might be on your scratch paper. The money market, there's the demand for money, there's the supply of money. When you buy bonds, it shifts the supply of money to the right, and interest rate is driven down. Okay, interest rate 1, interest rate 2. So interest rates are down because the money supply increases. What's effective on aggregate demand? It's going to increase. AD is up. So we're in part H now. It should be an H. Okay. Aggregate demand will increase. Why? Because investment spending increases, and investment spending is a component of AD. Output and price level, they're both up. Output up, price level up, because AD increases. That's the only thing you have to write there for part I. The last part, if the central bank continues the open market operations identified, buying bonds, explain the long run effects on inflation. Well, if the money supply keeps increasing, don't worry about this graph here, but if the money supply keeps increasing, remember the equation of exchange. If the money supply keeps increasing, price level is going to increase, so we're going to get inflation. Inflation is going to increase because of the increase in the money supply. And then the last part, K, they wouldn't ask this year because it's foreign exchange, the value of domestic currency. Well, because our interest rates are low and our price level is high, our currency is going to devalue. Foreigners would not want to invest their money in the United States because the rate of return is so low, interest rates are low, and they will not want to be buying our products because the products are expensive, price level is up. Therefore, there's less demand for the US dollar, and less demand means a depreciation or lower value of the US dollar. So that is the last part there. Okay, so that's the sample macro questions.